Hi, I'm Mike Henry. And this is my Procreate 5 demo for the piece I call Crystal the CHUD. Now I feel this character needs a little bit of prologue. What I wanted to do when I was doing this series of monster character designs was I wanted to try originally and reference some of the classic stuff and in a new way maybe spin or twist or do something new with it, so that it wasn't necessarily directly related, but you could through a few steps associate a character with maybe some classic universal monster or adjacent type character. But in order to keep things fresh, I also wanted to reach into a couple of other, again, adjacent categories or genres. That's why we have, the adventurer, who is also a mix between the Invisible Man, and that's Maxine, the Invisible Woman that we have in the lineup. For this one, I wanted to dip into something that was slightly more modern and get a little bit more of the horror angle, and I thought, what would be a good twist on what we've already got in the lineup? So I decided to look through some of the modern horror stuff, some of the modern monster stuff, and one that I thought would be cool and also kind of check off a list of different types of characters and different body types and everything was actually the CHUD from the movie CHUD. Now, there are several CHUDs in the movie, it's not just one, but the idea in the original movie is that these are radioactive humans and all that kind of stuff. What I wanted to do instead was address the notion of these sort of underground dwelling creatures, try to reference some of the aspects of their design, but then also revamp it like I have a lot of these other characters to make it more applicable to my world. So we'll talk a little bit about what the differences are, but I want you to keep this character in mind because this is the challenge of this design, is trying to speak a little bit to this while also making an appealing character that people can feel they can identify with. And that brings us to Crystal here. So let's talk about a combination of the process of developing the character as well as the backstory of the character. From the beginning, I knew that I wanted this person to be short. We needed some more height diversity in the cast, and I thought also that would potentially have some sort of a logic behind these creatures that lives in a subterranean world. So they have some aspects in this world that I've created that overlap with say goblins from World of Warcraft and stuff, where they are tinkerers and engineer types, but it's also got a little bit of the gnome side, actually more like the deep gnomes or underdark gnomes. So the idea here is that this is a very sophisticated race who has developed the ability to live deep underground. And how deep underground? I mean extremely deep. The CHUDs were basically I think sewer dwelling and maybe a little further. We're talking Journey to the Center of the Earth style creatures, meaning depth, Journey to the Center of the Earth style, going that deep. And what I did was I thought it'd be really fun then to say, okay, if that is the way this race sort of operates, then can we tie that into Maxine? Maxine is this adventurer who has all of these crazy stories, and she also has access to a certain amount of technology, and she's super rich and everything. So I thought it might be cool if we take this character here, who's a master engineer, master builder, master tinkerer type character, and she befriended Maxine when Maxine came to this, the super deep in the earth. And that was from an adventure, a Maxine adventure. So when you really think about it, then it's this character becomes Maxine's chief engineer to engineer all of her cool shit that she's got for her shipping business, and because she's super rich and has a big thriving business that does shipping and adventuring and all that kind of stuff. And then this character she befriended when she was in an adventure in the center of the earth, met this race of people, and then came out with Crystal here, who then supports her now and builds all of her shit. So obviously CHUD and the concept of a cannibalistic humanoid underground dweller or whatever, that is not exactly what she is. She is not that. Obviously, that is not only that, but it's like that is a property, I guess you could say. So she's not exactly that. She's more just trying to reference the notion of this like race of underground peoples. And in their case, they happen to be, they've got access to all of this ore, and they've got access to other things. They had to learn how to survive, etc., etc. So they're just like super smart, and they have a lot of ingenuity. She happens to be one of the smartest and most capable of them all. But she works for Maxine. She doesn't work for Maxine in the fact that like she has to, like she could leave at any time, but she and Maxine really get along, and they've been on some crazy adventures together now. And she also likes the fact that Maxine can sort of get her access to whatever she wants. And that lets her be able to make whatever she wants, and she really likes that. So they're pals, and but at the same time, it's kind of like an employment/pal situation. One thing too, obviously, we've only got one of her people here, which is herself, but the other people, most of them don't have hair, and the ones that do have hair do not have this brightly colored hair, so she actually is a little bit like of a weirdo amongst her people. It's that thing where like some of the people think her hair is like beautiful, and a lot of them are like, oh, what a weirdo. But then when she like came to the surface, of course, people just think it's like crazy cool because the average human doesn't have hair like that. That said, we know that we've been exploring some pretty wacky color palettes with this character lineup, and so we wanted to, she might not be so crazy different compared to some of the other characters. Like Hazel's got lots of big, like sort of muted pink hair and stuff, but the point is that her hair has this slight iridescent quality to it. You can see even more so than basically any other character in this lineup, this character is quite the composite of lots of influences and references. The initial kickoff was the CHUD reference. Then after that, it was referencing things like the goblins and the gnomes from World of Warcraft, even a little bit the Dark Iron Dwarfs, just a touch, and then the Underdark gnomes, the deep gnomes from D&D, and other things like that. And then there's the Journey to the Center of the Earth reference, and so it's all just kind of like, mashed up in this big thing. There's even a little bit of like a Launchpad McQuack side to her, because she's not designated as like Maxine's pilot, like Launchpad is, but it's similar to that thing of like, whenever there's a new gadget that she's developed, obviously she's going to pilot it or use it first. Occasionally she might hand something to Maxine and be like, here, I don't know if it works, but like try this. But most of the time, like, she's super stoked to be using the things that she develops. So if she makes like some crazy robot that flies, she wants to be the one piloting that. So she sometimes becomes like the de facto pilot for Maxine, but she is not the pilot for Maxine. It's more tied to the stuff she's developing. Now, something that you'll see through this is a lot of color identity issues. If you go back and you see the way the flats were originally, she had some muted aspects. So if you scroll back in the timeline, you'll see that when I got done with the color key phase, she was, let's say, slightly realistically colored. Like, she had some bright parts of her costuming, but the big thing that I wanted to make sure that we got back to was the really bright, saturated, neon, sort of synth wavy inspired look. We had some characters that deliberately deviated and pushed things in certain ways. And the last character, the Blob, brought some of the crazy colors back in. But here's now a character that is not comprised of slime, and we need to find a way to keep her as punchy as the slime character. So now here, right there, you saw it go by really quickly. That was my last color shift where I felt like, oh, now I found her. So what we did was, instead of making the leather, we made the leather purple, and then we made the costume a little bit brighter and more saturated and a little bit more loud. We made the hair a little more intense. And then once I realized I could make these tools, which you see me drawing right here with the symmetry tool, I could make the tools kind of have these glowy bits and tie that into her engineering. I was like, now we've got it. Now we figured it out, because I had this character sketched and color keyed, and she just sat. And I loved the character, but I did not love the fact that I wasn't really solving her colors very well. I wanted her to be crazy color. Oh, especially like, I mean, another reference you could think of is like the trolls from World of Warcraft. They're very, very colorful as well. So I'm sort of pulling from a lot of places to try and get like the right vibe for this character. And so once we did the change with the leather, where he said, okay, we're gonna make the leather purple because fuck it, everything in this world is gonna be colorful. Why would I just force myself to make this leather brown? I was like, oh, that unlocks everything for me. So once I made the belts and the straps purple, then it was like, cool, I got it right. And I kind of recalibrated myself back to like the original inspiration back when I was doing Larry and Hazel and oh, I forgot her name. Lucy. I feel like such an asshole. When I was doing those, so much of it was about questioning the right color that something had to be. And then I think once we were getting into like Fulgencio and Maxine, we were specifically referencing more real materials and finding other ways, because we were trying to touch on kind of like different facets of this world. And then once I came back to here and we had a couple of characters that were a little bit more under control palette-wise, I shouldn't say under control, but just like, let's say a little more natural colorize, and then we went to the blob, and the blob kind of had to be crazy colored because it's like green and purple and it's a big slime thing. Now it was like back to a humanoid where it was like, okay, she's got to have just as much punch as some of those early characters. Something I want to mention in this video, because I know a lot of people are really digging the Monster series, but I'm sure there's also people out there that are like, yeah, this is cool, but can we start doing some other things? And I try to make sure I'm folding in other things while I'm in the middle of this, but this is going to come to a close soon. It's not coming to a permanent close, similar to the Village Corrupted characters. Like, there's always an opportunity to add more characters. In fact, I feel like I could design monster-themed characters forever. Like, you kind of never... I mean, I could start overlapping, too. We've only got one vampire in the lineup. It wouldn't be bad to get another vampire in the lineup. But in the spirit of sort of closing it off and saying we've done our job here and we've got this cool thing, and if I want to go any further, I need to actually decide what everything is in this world. In the interest of that, we're going to wrap it up for a bit. How many more characters are there? Well, right now we have one other character that is completely painted, one other character that will be finished painted today. I'm going to wrap him up today. And then we have one last character who pulls everything back to our very first character and references our very first character, and that's the end of the lineup for now. So when all is said and done, we're going to end up with 3 villains and one character that can kind of be a villain or a good guy, no matter, like, depending on various things, and then the rest, quote unquote, good guys. I'm also in the process of doing a relationship chart so everybody understands kind of like the scheme of all of these characters, and then that will be it, and I'm gonna like end it for now. And then some point down the line, if I come up with more characters that I just feel really passionate about doing, or I actually take the IP as more of like a developed thing to some, you know, more a greater conclusion kind of, or to a next step, I should say, not a conclusion, but a next step, then I'll start doing more. But as it is right now, what I really want to do is I want to wrap up the Monster series, feel really happy with the ones that I've done, and then actually do a couple of Village Corrupted characters again. And then in between all of those, the sort of connective tissue between all of these pieces that are part of these series will be other random one-off pieces. So that's kind of the plan. So if you're wondering how much longer the Monster series is going to go on, there's 3 more characters after this one. One done, one almost done, and the last one has been designed and color keyed, but I haven't made any progress on her. And then we will be pretty happy with where we ended up with all of them. And if you're keeping score, that'll be 15 characters, 16 illustrations, because Blob has 2 versions of it. It's got the like humanoid form and then the full slime form. So that'll be it. Okay, let's talk about the piece and the steps we're in. If you are new to the channel, go back and watch some of the older ones. sorry to do that to you, but I've explained this so many times and I don't want people who've been on this channel a ton to get sick of it. I'll do the very, very quick explanation, and then I really recommend going back to like Dead Larry. And then if you really want to understand how the monster pieces are done, go back to Dead Larry and then go back through chronologically through the monster characters. They're pretty clear. They stand out pretty clearly in the thumbnail lines. You'll find them all. And in each one of them, I talk about kind of like their background, but I also talk about their process. But as time goes on, I talk less and less about the process because I don't want it to get too repetitive. But as Stan Lee always says, every comic is somebody's first comic, so every video is somebody's first video. So I'll give the quick synopsis here. The way that I work in these pieces, not the way that I work in everything I ever paint, because different paint techniques and different processes serve different things differently. So you might want to change that up depending on what problems you're trying to solve and what type of illustration you're trying to do. But in these monster pieces, what I'm doing is a series of layers that are about shadow, a series of layers that are about light, and then some that are about sort of like supporting it even further. So what I mean by that is we've got flats. Flats are your flat colors that you're putting down. In my case, I put them down in separate layers so that I can tweak them if I have to easily later. And then those all sit in a folder. And then on top of that is a folder with lots of other stuff. And that's why I'm saying like go back to older ones, because I'm not going to explain all of it. All I'm going to tell you is that the series of shadows involve things like ambient occlusion passes and direct cast shadows and some supporting shadows and some other shadows that sort of develop a softness and a way to have like the light be directed in addition to the cast shadow. And then there's the light shadows, and that's going to be things like highlights and just sort of like the brighter values that are above the mid-range, as well as some shines. And then on top of all of that, we're going to have things like bounce light, which is all just like color picked and adjusted in opacity. So if you're trying to understand it all, again, go back to Dead Larry, work your way through some of those videos, check out exactly how everything's done. I break it down much more in depth. And then of course my whole channel, I don't remember what episode this is. I think we're at like 220 something now. I have covered many different types of painting, many different methods. The reason why you're seeing me paint with the methods that you see here is because this is a culmination of lots of tricks that I've built up over the years, and then you just sort of employ them in different ways. And I'm doing it this way because Procreate has a layer limit, and in order for me to get a certain look and feel that I'm looking for and to have the fidelity and the control that I'm looking for, this is the method that I found works best for me lately, let's say for the last like year or so. If some of you out there may have said like, oh, but what about color picking and painting, or what about painting on one layer, or what about all these things? There's lots of different ways to skin this cat. There's no wrong way to do art. There are better ways to do some aspects of art and maybe some more efficient things here or there, but there's no wrong way to do this. You do what you're comfortable with, you do what works for you and what accomplishes the goal. I, in the past, have done lots of different methods for painting, and all of those methods actually play a part in what I do today. For instance, if you are the type of person who either does paint or you know of people who paint or whatever on one layer, I do that sometimes too. Like if I do this whole piece and everything is the way I want it, but then it's like, oh shit, I have to like repaint that nose, or I have to repaint that finger, or whatever it is. I might not completely I might not turn off all those layers and rebuild it from scratch. I may just slap a layer on top and color pick and paint, just free paint, so to speak, right on top. There's also things like the way I use multiply layers that actually came from long time ago, doing more cell shaded stuff. And then over time, I've taken that sort of cell shaded method and moved it over into the painterly method. I also have done lots of things where I'm choosing my color, and then all of the, let's say for instance in her skin, I might have 5 layers to get all of those different color variations in her skin. I also used to do the color picking method where it's like you're very specifically saying, well, if something's green, it's going to go from a cool blue green to a more sort of like right in the middle Kelly green, you could say, over to a yellow green in the highlights, and picking all of those colors and understanding all of that color theory is another method that I do, but I don't do it that much now because Procreate is harder to do that in without having to merge things and losing some control. The thing is, none of these techniques are right or wrong. They're all just about how you're going to address different problems. So that's why you see me painting in the way that I do in these. I found that it was the best way to try and get at what I was trying to solve, which in these cases are full body characters. Most of them are cut off at the legs just because I prefer that crop. She is not, because she's a little person and we need to show her whole body so that she's at least somewhat in proportion. She's even actually a little bigger than she should be. Like if you were to put her next to Larry, she should be really small. You can loosely use the size of heads or eyes or hands, depending. If you have really extreme anatomy variation, you can't really use hands that much, but using heads is a really good way to figure out how tall all your characters are. If you size all your characters to have the same general head size, which taking into account some width and some height aspects, you can size all of your characters pretty easily that way. That's why when we see a character with a really small head, the character feels really big. And when we see a character with a really big head, they seem really small. So anyways, we are doing full body characters, which means they have more details, more individual elements of them. I shouldn't say more details in the sense that I don't mean like you put in more detail. I just mean they have more individual elements, which then means more layers usually if you're keeping everything kind of separate and adjustable, like I do. So for instance, the fact that she has the wrench and the hammer and that other little piece that goes to something that you can't really see, all of those things are individual elements. If I, for instance, using the methods that I'm currently using in this piece, if I wanted to do a character that had like a giant backpack with tons of stuff spilling out of it, that would all be different layers, and I would have to start getting really creative about how I place my layers and all of that. So anyways, full body characters, lots of individual elements, layer count goes up, have to develop a different way to paint because doing, say, 6 layers for one piece of the character is no longer viable. For instance, if you want to see, the only one that's really fresh in my mind, although there are several in my library or whatever, all my videos, if you want to see one where I'm actually choosing colors and painting, just saying like I'm going to paint with this color now and then I'm going to paint with this color now, there's the one for Alberto from Giant Robo. The video might be called either Shocking Alberto or Alberto of Shockwave, because these are different titles he has in the series. You might find that video, but that's one that I just really distinctly remember being more of the classic I'm going to choose this color and paint with this color variety. But that method, I can still do that method for like a headshot, but it gets really tricky once I start doing it for a full body. I was recently speaking with an artist who I admire, a really good guy, who I had the pleasure of recently talking to, and he and I were talking about Photoshop layers, and I mentioned that my Photoshop layers, well actually I mentioned my Procreate layers go up into the 60 or 70 or something like that, and he was like, wow, that's a lot, and I was like, yeah, but my Photoshop layers go up to like 300, and then he was like, what are you doing? And it really just comes down to like, why not, right? As long as I have a process and a way to organize everything and sort of be able to control that type of a scope, I get lots of control out of that. I want to cut off that thought for a minute so we can talk about what I'm doing here. So I'm starting to lay in the background, the usual background that all of these monster pieces have to really start tying them all together. And I'm putting in just all this like swirly smoke stuff in the background, in the foreground. And now I'm going to start resizing her. I wanted to do a version of her that was at the size I painted, but then I needed to make her the right size. So I bring Zola in for a minute and I resize her. I had to do a bunch of stuff on the layer side to like merge her and get her in a new file, of course. And then I repositioned her on this rock chunk, which I didn't have painted. I just sized her, got her where I wanted, and now I'm painting the rocks in order to make it fit. So how did I do the rocks? I just used a couple of brushes. I don't remember which ones. You use the brushes that make sense to you to try and make something look kind of like rough and rocky. I also knew it was going to be covered by a bunch of fog, so I just went in and painted in the flat for the rock, and then I used the same shadows that I used for her. I pulled from my same purple that I used for all the shadows and set that as a multiply. At this point, she is one layer, and the rock is now the new like sort of thing I'm working on. There's like a flat for the rocks, shadow for the rocks, this rim light that has to be the same as what's reflecting onto her, and then we're going to turn all the layers back on so that we see what we're working with here. Starting adding in some lighting using the same blue that I used for the highlights on Crystal herself. Also doing some value stuff, trying to make sure that she's reading clearly and that the rock is good and the fog is good, you know, just trying to get all the right balance here. I was trying to figure out what to put her on so that it looked like natural and then she looked like she was properly staged without it being like ridiculous or something. I actually considered at one point putting her on like Larry's shoulder or something. I thought that might be funny. But at the same time, that would also make it more about the joke with Larry and not about just presenting her as a character. So now this is wrapping up here. There's some little tweaky stuff happening. I can't really perceive it, so it was probably some little annoying thing that caught my eye and I wanted to get rid of it. Here we turn all the layers off and turn them on again because we're checking something out, and this here is the final version. One thing that I wanted to speak to that I think also gives this character a little bit of punch that I forgot to mention earlier is the white piercings. I think it's kind of cool because it stands out a lot. I think that it also maybe, I'm not saying that I put this much thought into it, but it maybe tells a story about like what are those white piercings? Why does she have so many of them? Is that something that her people have in general? Is that a material that her people have access to? Like, why is it like that? And I think that that's just kind of interesting. It also really sets off the kind of intensity of her having these like bright white piercings in addition to her other bright colors. It just kind of, I don't know, it gives it this extra kind of electric vibe. I also wanted to show you guys the version before she got shrunk, just so you can see it. This is before I sort of sized her down to get her on that pedestal and properly visualize her, just so you can see, I don't know, a slightly clearer version of the image. All of this, of course, will be up on ArtStation and DeviantArt, but not this more zoomed in version, so this is probably the highest res version of Crystal that you'll be able to see. So yeah, anyways, I thought this was a really kind of fun character. She has a lot of fun. I mean, you can imagine the way this character talks. She would sound like probably pretty spunky, probably run off at the mouth because she's thinking about a lot of things, maybe making calculations, little bit of a stereotype / archetype, little bit of some new stuff, and just a big melange of like all of these different references in one character. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like. It helps with the whole YouTube machine. Also, if you're not subscribed, please consider doing so, and I'll see you on the next one. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are all of the places where you can find me.